one. I'm continuing in a totally different vein, more along the end results of the tobacco settlement agreement. I'm setting this in between an historical review, which is more or less the philosophy and the thoughts that I have and that I've earned in many ways, and through the, I guess, through the less than scholarly efforts of living in the house of Bernarda Alba, or the house of whatever you want to call it, perhaps the house of Brown and Williams, less than an attribution to the fine poet, wonderful poet, Federico Garcia Lorca. But okay, so we're going in another direction. What is the question?
Economically, tobacco changed after the Master Settlement Agreement. How so? What's tobacco's place today and then?
I'll take the first part. And economically, you're looking at the very essence of there are so many areas that are economically part of tobacco that you don't really think about when you're involved with tobacco. Without knowledge of what these areas are, you can pretty well assume that you have to get something out of the ground. And one of the foolish references to the kinds of tobacco was pursued hotly by the agriculture department in Brazil, and in determining whether or not they were actually upping the dosage, and this thing called Y1 is an absurdity, because Brazil has been involved in tobacco for since the 60s, and maybe before that, when the British dropped off seeds for the farmers to tear down the Amazon and the trees and create what they were creating in Kentucky, flue tobacco, which is the worst kind of tobacco, was because you have to burn trees to get it. Now, in order to get to that point, that industries was involved in one part of it, which is farming, agriculture. So you have the agricultural economy, and that in states that really don't do as much, because in Brazil it's so simple, because they got the seeds, they got the poor people, they got them, they gave them a sharecrop, and they gave them land, and they said, tear down the Amazon. Well, the results of that is one part of economy. Now, as far as seeds and what they planted, they were going to plant whatever made the most money. And naturally, when anything came along, that would be a reference point for introducing it, because that simply owns Sousa Cruz, and Sousa Cruz, and from the point of view of the people who were actually developing the kinds of tobacco to be used, Brazil is like number one, and number one in production of actual leaf production, and I think number one in terms of, or number one and two with China in terms of producing the actual cigarettes. A lot of this goes to South America, but nevertheless, when you're looking at a product, you've got to tear it down and say, okay, you have so many ways this product is developed. The one thing is from the seed to the plant. Then how you develop the plant, how you top it, how you cut it. I'm sure there are people that know an awful lot about this. Well, I'm no novice in this, and I can tell you that in the tail chasing that was going on in the Y1 business, I don't mean to demean the activity, because surely how much power you have is important. But, the reality of tobacco planting is that it sort of moved already from the United States to Brazil. And Brazil has, by the way, pretty much of a conditioned reflex to a lot of things that can be done. And they have already got seeds, and I was amused that someone is going to pursue Brown and Williamson's house of the the development of tobacco in order to find out how economically they can do something and created a stronger tobacco. It's all manipulated. There's nothing mysterious about this. It's like anything else. If you want to make candy sweeter, you put more sugar in, or corn sugar, or whatever. If you want to make a mixture of ethanol and gas, you simply produce it. And that's the geniuses who've been in charge of this have been absolutely off into the wild stratospheric zones of stupidity, as far as I can tell. Why spend money defining for us, the American public, what is important? Because you don't know where you're starting to begin with. And God forbid that I would ever have to deal with someone like the former Food and Drug Administrator, who is so excited because he's found something in the area of enhanced productivity in tobacco. Not to give any secrets away, gee, wow, you can find all these patents, and you can find that back in the 60s, there was bat destroying the Amazon. And now there's farmers, and if you get into their territory, I don't think you want to go there, because the farmers in Brazil have taken over their property. They become another class, and so economically, they're going to continue the way they were, just as in China. And so you have these two countries that are economically feasible, and you just can't eliminate anything. So if you take it from the seed to the plant, that's one thing. Then you go from the pack, and you go to the cigarette making plant. Well, that's been long defined as a simple procedure. There are variations on this, and I pointed one out in another interview. And that to me is more a thing of, when are we going to find this out? Basically, that's more interesting to me than anything else. And that has to do with a G13 formula, which is there. I don't think it's disappeared. It belonged to a couple of tobacco companies, and was patented, very clearly patented, and you can see it. But as to formulas, the formulas are sealed, but I think it's still held in, what are the ingredients and what are basic to the development of tobacco, still held in the United States government under the HHS. In other countries, for example, in England and Germany, they have the formulas. There was the Hunter Commission in England, and the Germans would say, no, don't bring me any of your American tobacco, because it has to meet our purity standards. And still pretty much is the same. On the other hand, we know there's pesticides in tobacco. We know there's other things. Economically, when you put all the things together from the time that you actually develop a cigarette and you put it on the market, you have touched upon so many industries, so many different boxing and packaging and labor and intensive labor in terms of the movement of tobacco across state lines, the Commerce Department, military contracts, Indian contracts, all kinds of reservation, contracts with um, uh, various things, that various entities, and it's just big business. That's all it is. And I doubt that anybody really knows how much money there is out there and how much is produced. We simply look at the United States and say this is the way it goes. And certainly in smuggling, there's another dime, and in selling without taxing or taxing, So economically, the tobacco industry is always going to be healthy. Now, can I ask you again what the parts of this question are? There's maybe three answers in here.
What I'm curious about is to know what's tobacco's place today.
As opposed to yesterday?
Yes.
You mean before anything was focused on the
maybe before the Master Settlement Agreement?
Yeah, but when something broke, it was actually the silence, and the breaking of a couple of things happened in 1993, and certainly documentation got out. But I believe that you may be referring more to Jeffrey Wigand and what he had in terms of in his head. I assume he was surely aware of a lot of different things, because I think the Y1 experiment, part of that had to do with it. But in general, speaking of tobacco in terms of how it has developed economically and the tobacco companies, it's kind of a boring subject in one way, but look, in the 20 years or so that this has been going on, tobacco has been able to immunize itself, which was the purpose of the first master settlement, and certainly part of the purpose of the second master settlement. So, in effect, what you have is you have created a monster, and you've allowed it to grow. That's simply the point. The point also is that if you compare the past with the present, you have not only enhanced the profit, but the persons where the wealth is transferred from one to another, from the tobacco companies to, let's just say, the states, not the lawyers, but the states. It's just merely used in a different way, and that's in itself a kind of an interesting way. We want to have so many people killed per year in order to keep the population under control. It seems to be the case. And if you're killing on just the area in North America, if you kill, let's say, so many people prematurely in their 40s, then you have controlled Social Security to a certain extent, and Medicare to a certain extent. So that seems to be appropriate. I have never come across anyone who will accept my argument that if you're going to fight them, the tobacco companies, don't let them exist. Just stop them. But of course that wouldn't work, and that's my argument. That's their argument. My argument is, look, if you could stop Hitler, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you? And yet you're saying, no, we're not going to stop Hitler. We're not going to stop Hitler? Why? I mean, what's the point?
That's
I
an
mean,
interesting concept.
he's doing so
It's
well.
interesting.
He's doing so well, and my goodness, he could do such a wonderful thing for every country. And by the way, maybe he'll come up through Brazil collecting. No, don't smoke, but you can collect all the profits, and then end up in North America. I mean, it's the same argument. You don't want to get rid of what is presumably a favorable thing, and that's idiocy in my personal view. But then again, I'm probably the only person on the planet who actually would endorse that and say that. But nevertheless, it exists as the nemesis of society. You have so many people that you want to kill, and then you have so much in the economy, in all of the economies worldwide, and they all seem to have something to do with growing, planting, producing jobs, and therefore, there's at least 1,500 to 2,000 jobs that you could name right off the top where you are creating jobs for people, including the transport of things, and even including the underworld, so to speak. I'm not really sure what the underworld is, but if it's legal and it's out there, the argument is there that you could very well make it the penultimate conclusion that you're doing a good thing. You kill enough people and have enough people who can come off of the economic rolls in the latter life, because, the death of the 42-year-old woman is not that unusual, with lung cancer, bleeding out, and choking on her own blood. That's quite a normal situation, even in the 30s and 20s. Women, number one, although statistics change, the number one killer for women is lung cancer. And in 1964, there was no such thing. Or they couldn't find it was a man's disease, so therefore it didn't have it. But I'm not preaching here. I'm just trying to tell you that it is the feasibility, the economic feasibility is so important, and there's just no way of measuring how much money is out there. It's like you don't want to mess with some things, because if you go down to Brazil in the south or in the Amazon, wherever they're putting up bats plants, where they've torn down half of our global necessity, so to speak, like the Urals. I mean, they'd plant tobacco in the Urals if they could get it, but you don't. Not enough fox and wolves to grow it, I guess, or not a great growing season. But on the other hand, if you're looking for seeds and if you're looking for the economics of it, there's basic difference. One, when you started out some 20 years ago, it was very small by comparison to today. Today, you've created a great monster, and it's just growing, and it's a growing business. When you measure things in billions of dollars, and most of it is in unmarked bills, or somehow it gets into unmarked bills, you never know. You probably have $1 trillion industry or more. And if you don't have it today, you're going to have it soon. I'm sure you do, but nevertheless. The economics, when you started and you just transferred some of the wealth over to the three parts. One, the lawyers, the health advocates, and the states, and they've done what they wanted with it. And that's essentially it. And roads and the development of everything else is just part of the wonderful world of business. That's what this is all about. Success is there for the tobacco industry, but it's more successful now than it was when the people who thought even those who might have been idealistic, which I don't believe was true, started this whole business in the master settlement agreement. Oh, by the way, you also have a $15 billion treasury in what did they do with it in the Attorneys General Association? Isn't that wonderful? It goes to politics.